Hey guys, it's Guido. Welcome back to Tactics Talk and a tank review. We are reviewing the AMX M445. You may ask yourself, why is Guido reviewing one of the older heavy tanks in the game? The AMX M445 is a fairly nondescript tank, but recently it has had a split off for a mini line going onto the French heavy tanks that have armor, if you can believe it. So they've built some of those and added them to the game. So we'll do this the standard way. We'll do a quick overview of the tank. We will take a look at the tech tree and considerations in there. I will do a quick comparison against the other Tier 7 heavy tanks. We'll talk about that. And we'll come back out. I'll show you my setup, and then I'll give you a quick look at how I did with that tank, which is kind of in two parts because I had grinded? I don't know. I played it a long time ago, and then I played another probably 50 or 60 battles recently in order to unlock the new Tier 8 tank where those two lines split off at this tank, the AMX M445. And then I've got 3 examples of gameplay for you that we'll go through for this review, so let's get started. All right, we'll start with a quick overview. The AMX M445 doesn't get a lot of love. It's overshadowed by quite a few of the other Tier 7 heavy tanks in there. It was a blueprint-only tank, incorporating some of the design elements of the Tiger II, and it started in 1945. Never really saw the light of day, obviously, only being a blueprint tank. You look at the side of it, profile-wise, sort of looks like a German heavy tank, late World War II era German super heavy or heavy tank, not necessarily super heavy. Pretty decently angled front armor, fairly large turret, pretty big billboard side kind of tank. One thing to note on this that's odd, see this little step up right here, if you can see where my cursor is, going across the tank right here. When you are looking directly sideways 90 degrees or further 100, 110, 120 degrees, that limits your depression towards the back, especially right over the back deck. It's got very poor depression over the back deck. We'll talk about its depression later. That's one of the weird design elements. You'll see that it is sloped armor up front, not too crazy slope, but not bad. The lower plate is fairly thin. The upper plate is decently armored. Angled, this does pretty well as far as bouncing goes, but it is not a super heavily armored tank, which we'll show you in just a minute. It's got a machine gun port right there. Like a lot of the French tanks, pretty exposed front sprocket, and you're going to poke that out coming out around a corner pretty easily on that. And not a very big gun mantlet, although there is some angling right here. This flat plate on the front of the turret is pretty vulnerable. Then it's got the hatch up top as well. If you look at it with the other tanks, the IS-2 is lower. The Oni, it's an outlier. It's just ridiculously large. Black Prince actually has a lower profile itself. That's another IS version. You got the KV-3, which is roughly the same height, kind of the size. Tiger P, same thing. 4503. You can see that it is roughly the same size. The Tiger's actually kind of small amongst the rest of the Tier 7 heavy tanks. And then the T-29, which is quite large overall, easily as high and even bigger or longer as far as that goes. So that's a general overview of the tank. Let's go ahead and jump into the tech tree and see if there's any interesting consideration. Okay, for the tech tree, you can see it comes up through the D1 here and then splits off right at the one we're doing today, the AMX M445. So you can do that one line and you get yourself to the 5100 or to the AMX 65T. If you've already gone through to the 50B, then you're starting back at the M445 and you've got to get more experience to get the 65T. If you're coming up the line new, then you've got to decide which way you want to split right there. A couple things to think about. At the BDR G1B, you have 5 crew. Back here at the B1, you're 4 crew. So you add a crew member here. ARL is 5 crew. You see down at the bottom 05, and the AMX M445 is 5 crew. The armored tree is 5 crew all the way up to the AMX M454. So that's a Tier 10 with 5 crew. But if you go over to the 5100, you are dropping a crew member off. The radio operator goes away, and it's a 4 crew tank. The AMX, where is it? The FCM 50T is a 5 crew tank, so it will train crews as a premium for both your 5100 or your AMX 65T. So no problems there. So really, the only big consideration is that you've got the crew member, one of them that's going to drop off if you go up to 5100. But for the case of the AMX 65T, which is the line I'm reviewing currently right now, then that 5 crew members will move along quite comfortably, no problem right there. Now for the comparison, you see we've got the AMX M445 on the left, and across the right are the rest, or most of the rest of the Tier 7 heavies that it competes with from the tech tree. Things to note right here then are I am using 100% cruise, top modules, and no skills. So when I go into the configure, I set them all to basically the same tank. Again, 100% cruise, top modules, and no skills. All of them are using the top gun. You will note on the Oni, it's got the derp gun on that, and it shows a 114 firepower. That gives you a little clue about how their numbers are a little bit screwed up right here. Obviously, it's not a 114 when it's blapping that big derp gun, but there you have it. We're not talking about the Oni anyway. We're off to the M445. So what does the M445 have for you? Well, it's got pretty good penetration right out the door at 212. So that's top in class. That's a nice thing. It does have some pretty darn good base armored piercing penetration. Rate of fire is decent. Not quite as fast as, say, a Tiger or a Black Prince. Black Prince is there at 12.52, but it's really got that pew-pew gun. Why? Because the Black Prince up here is dropping 150 alpha, and the AMX M445 is dropping a 240 alpha. The Oni is an outlier with the HE, and that requires a pen. But of course, you got the IS series kind of tanks running around at 390 with that 122, and you've got the T29 running around with 320, with then the AMX and the Tiger P and the Tiger rolling around with the 240. So pretty low on the alpha, but with a good penetration. Its rate of fire is not that much higher really than a Tiger P or a Tiger. The Tiger's at 9.32. Tiger P is at 7.28. It's actually tied with the Tiger P at 7.28. So that's interesting. The Tiger has a clear advantage right there amongst those tanks that are sitting down there at 240 average alpha damage or 240 alpha damage over the other two. So while the penetration is nice, it's actually overcome a little bit by a relatively slow rate of fire. Still, with the 390 122s on the Soviet type of vehicles only sitting at 175 pen, the 212 is definitely competitive. So there are some trade-offs there, and those are things to think about while you are driving this tank around. It's at 8.25 on the reload. Black Prince, again, outlier because it's a pew-pew. Oni, an outlier because it's the derp. If you look at the rest of them, it is relatively comparable to those, with the 390 alpha guns having 2 to 3, 4 seconds more on them right there. Turret traverse is actually pretty good, so that thing moves around. A lot of them are fairly low, like the Oni is very slow. The Tiger is relatively slow as well to turn the turret. The AMX M445 can spin it around. Now this is where the tank is really quite nice. It's got great depression, so minus 10 is really, really good for a heavy tank. And plus 12 on the elevation, which is kind of a typical issue. For some reason, French tanks don't like the look up very much, so not very good there. That can be limiting. It's not as bad a problem as having bad gun depression in World of Tanks, but if you get on some side slopes or places where you're tipped on your side a bit and you need to look the other way, then you can have issues getting your gun onto things that are above you in elevation. Aiming time is decent. It's not terrible. It's not as bad as the Soviet 122s, but it's not quite as nice as, say, the 2.21 on the Black Prince, but it's fairly comfortable. Dispersion is okay. Again, a fairly comfortable number. The Tiger is top in class at 3.3, and the M445 comes in at 0.35. I will tell you that in practice, it doesn't quite feel as nice as the Tiger 1 coming in there, and that may have something to do. I don't know if it's aim time or what, even though the aim times aren't that much. It just seems like this gun is not quite as accurate as the numbers are advertising it. But that's one of those things that becomes a feeling for people. The numbers are the numbers, and there they are. Average damage per minute, you can see that the Tiger 1 clearly wins at 2,242. And why there is such a massive disparity between it and tanks like the M445 is something is not understandable. The Tiger 1 just has a clear advantage over everybody in that case, in addition to some extra hit points and whatnot. Speaking of hit points, there you go. We're at 1350. There's that Tiger. Oni's at 1550. Tiger's at 1500. This is a pretty wide number, actually, between the 1200, 1230, I guess it is, that the IS has, and up to the 1550 that the Oni has. That's a pretty large disparity amongst a similar class of tank at the same tier. But 1350 is a decent pull. When we get down to the armor, now this is an interesting discussion because the line splitting off to the new mini line was supposed to be the armored French tanks. Clearly this one is not really of that vein. It's decently angled. 90 is okay, but it's not great. Even the Tiger 1 has more armor, although the Tiger 1 is flat plated. So when you're talking about side scraping or angling, things like that, it does okay with that. Unfortunately, it only has 40 degrees of armor on the 40 millimeters of armor on the side, and that does make it in danger of being overmatched by 122 caliber weapons, such things like that. The nice thing there is it's got quite large tracks, which can eat heat and HE and things like that for side scraping. So it is not really along the vein of a armored tank. I would not trust this tank's armor. It can save you in some situations, and side scraping is always a good idea, if only to minimize the amount of your tank that they have to aim at. So while I wouldn't say it's a capable side scraper, it can do it on occasion, but I would not make that my main tactic with this tank. The turret armor at 100 is decent, not amazing, but it's certainly not along the lines of, say, the T-29 sitting there at the lull bounce 279 with all the crazy angles on there. So really the armor is relatively indifferent, and you're relying on a fairly accurate, decent gun for a little more of a standoff kind of fighter rather than an in-your-face brawler. I say that with a hint of caution because I don't believe in a tank having a specific role. That's a tactic, not a role, but certain tanks will excel at certain tactics more than others. The specific power is actually top in class, and really all that does is gets it up and moving better than a lot of these other tanks. It climbs pretty decently. Top speed at 35, which is near the top. The Tiger one is 40, which kind of blows my mind. What I will say about this, especially every tank in the Tier 7 heavy class, there's certainly, none of them feel zippy at all, and some of them feel somewhat more sluggish than others, but they really all have more or less the same speed. Unless you're talking about two of them, the Black Prince and the Oni, and you're clearly going to feel the lack of speed in both those guys. Traverse speed is decent with the tracks. That surprised me. The IS-2 is at 39.63. Man, that thing can just spin around. I didn't even realize that thing was so much better. The other IS is actually good. The Russian version at 36.51, so that was interesting to me. Concealment, yeah, it's not good. It's 97. The Oni has a 1. That cracked me up. The wargaming number is 1. That's, I suppose it would be -1 if they were giving negatives, but they decided just to stick with the 1. Concealment, yeah, not great in there. And then spotting range. Every time I get down to this, I laugh because it just doesn't matter from Tier 5 and above. So that's a relative comparison. If I was hanging my hat on strengths of this tank, it would be obviously penetration, it would be gun depression, and it would be relatively decent accuracy with the gun and the occasional ability to side scrape and use its armor here and there, really against lower tier tanks in there, so it can bully if it needs to. So let's take a quick look at my setup, and right now I do not have my crew in there because I've moved them, but we'll talk about that in a moment. Obviously all the top modules here, no real reason to discuss anything less than that as far as I'm concerned in a review. I have a rammer, I have vents, and I am carrying an enhanced gun laying drive. Other things that you could potentially have on there. I think this is really all the things you would want to put on this thing, since it doesn't have the other gun help or whatever the heck that thing is called. I can't remember it at this moment, but anything to help this thing's combat capability. It's got tons of ammo, so you can really put whatever loadout you want in there. I've got 59 AP, 8 APCR, and still room for 7 HE. You're just not going to end up running out of ammo in this gun, and you can carry stupid amounts of HE like I am at 7. I have small kits and an automatic fire extinguisher, which I recommend for everything. Let's take a look at the crew as soon as I can hunt down where they are. All right, so my crew is actually sitting right now on the AMX M454. I've gone through and unlocked up to the Tier 10. We'll have a review of the Tier 9 and Tier 10 here in the near future. And I've already done the Tier 8. That's on the channel right there. You can see that the crew is quite good. Why is it so good? Because it ran around in my AMX, in my, what is it, FCM 50T for a long time, a premium tank. It was actually trained as an M445 crew, and I just threw it over in the 50T because I had a different crew that went up through the AMX series down there. So for the longest time, I was really just running an M445 crew in my FCM 50T. So I had quite a nice crew. It's improved a bit while I ground through the Tier 8, actually through the Tier 7, since I had to get the experience to unlock the new Tier 8, the Tier 8 and the Tier 9. But it was sitting at 3 skills and recently got its 4th, and it's got all the standard heavy skills in there. You see Brothers in Arms, 6th Sense, Recon, Repairs, and now working on Concealment for the Commander. And we're sitting down here with the gunner, Brothers in Arms, snapshot, deadeye, repairs, and concealment in that order. And this is actually a pretty good view for you guys who are looking at long-term skill increases or long-term skill training for your crews. For the driver, then, we have Brothers in Arms, smooth ride, off-road driving, repairs, and now working on clutch braking. I will tell you that I have moved this crew's skills around once. I did pay gold to do so, just to rearrange things. That's why you're seeing Brothers in Arms first. I would not normally take Brothers in Arms in the first slot. If you're willing to spend gold, this gets off track a little bit, but if you're willing to spend gold, that's certainly one way to do it right there. Train things that are useful, and then when you get them to 100%, swap them over to Brothers in Arms and train up something else. There's a whole other discussion right there, obviously. The radio guy, this is that discussion about having a radio guy. The nice thing about this is he can do that situational awareness and add some view range for your tank. So Brothers in Arms, situational awareness, repairs, concealment, and now I'm doing firefighting. The problem with a radio guy is there's just so little for him to take. So I'm actually on call for firefighting. I could have taken call for vengeance. But these two right here aren't even really worth selecting. I mean, you would when you got to skill, what's it going to be, 7 or 8 or whatever it happens to be, but you just run out of skills for radio guys to have. Taking a look down here at the loader, Brothers in Arms, safe storage, adrenaline rush, repairs, and firefighting. To some extent, you run into a very similar situation with these guys. Concealment is arguably better than at least 1 or 2 of those things in there. I may not have spent gold to change this guy, I don't remember, but there you have it on the crew. Let's take a look at how I did with it. All right, here's my statistics for the M445. I probably had, I want to say, around 80 or 90 battles in it for the first time I ground through it. So when I picked it up, I put another 40 or 50 getting up to the next tank. It was probably closer to 40 because I think it took 80,000 something to do. 45 maybe. So you're looking at 56%. Damage ratio 1.4, destruction 1.87. Armor use, you can see it's relatively low. It's starting to register, so you're not really bouncing a lot of stuff, but you are bouncing some things. Experience at 917, that's fairly low for me for recent tanks, but remember I played this one early on in my career. I would expect that to be much closer to 1,000 if I was just picking this up off the street today. Damage to enemy vehicles 1479, which is on the low side for my tier 7s, I would say. Actually, I suppose it's right about even now I think about it. It would be on the low side for my tier 8s. Damage received at 1,055 and assist at 3. Vehicle spotted. Destroyed is kind of low at 1.25 for me, but again, this is an older tank in here, and I've got maximum 8 kills, so I had one decent game in there. As a matter of fact, I think it was a recent pools, not a pools, but whatever the one before it is, that I had while I was grinding it up. So before that, it was something lower than 8 until very recently. So that's how I did in it. Not too bad, not too great. I don't have a breakout of what those last 40 or 50 battles were, but they were definitely better on average than those numbers there. So what's the point of that? It's actually a pretty decent tank, and I think you can do as well in this as you can in any tier 7 heavy. I'll just throw that out. I really believe that about any tank, but this one does not deserve the bad press that it has. So let's take a look at playing this tank a few times here. All right, for the first battle here, this is going to be an ace tanker. This is probably, I don't know, the first half a dozen games, maybe the first 10 games as I started grinding this once again for the next tank, for the new line right there. You can see that I am middle tier in a 357, which is actually a pretty good setup for this tank. All I have to deal with is a Lorraine and a Sturv. T29, the T29. The T29 can obviously be an issue, and then I'd like to avoid getting whacked by Artie and then machine gunned down by small tanks if I get surrounded. We are here on Assault on Siegfried line, so we are attacking on the attacking side on Assault map, and we are headed in here. So I'm going to head down to the south part of town. You see that I'm blue. That was from a situation that developed. I can't exactly remember the situation that developed, but I certainly got triggered in some manner. For you kids watching at home, don't do that. That's a whole nother subject. But as we move up here then, I'm going to take this kind of lockdown spot here and start looking around for, can I get into the city here, or do I have to worry about guys shooting me from the side? So I see this T29. See if I can come in here and take a look at him. He's trying to get away. There's that pretty decent accuracy, but I only dropped 202, so kind of a low roll, and that's one of those dangers with that 240 Alpha gun. You will sometimes have sub 200 shots with those guns on things like the Tiger P, and the AMX. And at tier 7, that can really be one of those ouch kind of things. So the EZ8 gets up there and gets thumped by a couple things. There's a couple guys to my right, which I'm not really paying good attention to, unfortunately. They're going to make themselves known here pretty soon. I'm looking for that T-29 or anyone else who's going to push through, but they don't. Got a guy on the left, so I'm like, oh, I'll get a shot on this guy. Watch this. Let me shoot that guy. Yep, that was... Oh, oops. And then the 40T, for some reason, only gets one shot on me. He must not have had an inner clip reload fast enough to get me. Now, here's the M6, and I talked about lower tiers potentially having issues, and if you angle decently, you can do okay. So I shoot, I move back. He shoots the EZ8 because that's an easier target right there. I've bounced one already. There's another one. And that had probably something to do with both moving and being angled at the same time, just spoiling his shot a little bit there. But so while I'm not saying the armor's fantastic, there are situations where you can use it, just like I did right there. Here comes the 40T. I wasn't sure if he was looking at me, but yep, he certainly was looking right at me. And he's not going to have any trouble shooting into my side armor. If I just poke the side out like a bozo, I can expect to be tracked, or not tracked, but maybe tracked. Expect to be pinned at the very least. So this is a dangerous spot right here. And the problem with it is stuff like that. Artillery can shoot in there. The T-29's anchoring that corner. I got to do what I just did to get back around that corner and get hit in the side again. So things aren't going great for me here. Put a shot in the T-29, try to dissuade him from moving forward too much. And now I'm just looking for that kill shot if I can somehow get a hold of him. That was a 269 roll, so that's more respectable at tier 7 for a tier 7 heavy. You can live with a damage roll like that. T-29 and I are bumping into each other a little bit. So I made the armor work a little bit. I've made the accuracy work a little bit. I haven't really had any opportunity to do the hold down gun depression thing, just based on the nature of the map. The mobility is good enough to get around, so no real arguments there. There you go, there's a bit of that accuracy. 40T thinks he wants to come out. What he knows is he's a two-shot to the two of us. And I actually bounced that, so where he hit, I didn't pay attention to it. He might have gone into my turret or just had a bad angle on some part of my tank. But again, I didn't rely on the armor right there, but it certainly was useful. This dude is shooting HE, so first things first, that guy wants to go out there, we'll kill him off. 122.44 is back up. This is cleanup on aisle 2 time right here. Gave a little too much side armor there. I mean, if you could have pinned into my side, that would have really hurt. But as it was, I only took 242. Those things reload in about 6 seconds, so they are a little bit ridiculous. In fact, they reload under my reload, so he'll win the reload war. I've probably got the damage to give. Yep, there we go. And we take him down. Minus a pin, I probably win that every time. And the Sturv is going to end up dying right here pretty quick. So some of the things I talked about there, ends up being an ace tanker, 4 kills, over 3,000 damage. Armor okay, so worked for me a couple times. A little bit of angling, a little bit of lower tier guns, and maybe just a little bit of luck thrown in there. So it's not something I relied on, but it did work out for me. Pretty good accuracy on the gun, decent reload. Alpha is kind of a pain. As you can see, it took me a while to chew through guys. But the tank can get up front if used correctly and do a pretty good job. Let's move on to the next one. Alright, for the second game, I'll show you a little bit more about the armor layout. This is a very good setup with a 3-5-7, so I'm top tier Murovanka, spawned down on the south side, and we're in encounter mode, or encounter game. I'm headed over here on the east side, going to the Magic Forest. So I'm the big kid on the block, so I'm going to take my tank to what I consider to be the critical terrain. I'd like to win down here as fast as possible, run these guys over, and then move on to the cab. And what you're going to find here is that I do have a little bit of trouble getting rid of these guys. They play it pretty well. They're going to use some of their good gun depression on me right here. The good news is that my okay-ish armor is going to help me out against a bunch of tier or lower tier tanks, a bunch of tier 5, 6s and mess like that. So I realized that from the beginning. I'm thinking, well, I'm in pretty good shape. I should be able to take these guys on. But a relatively long reload and not fantastic armor, but okay, is going to make me a little more confident, plus it's missing and such. This M4 actually does a really nice job with depression and just barely poking over right there. I bounce off of an easy 8, which I'm not really sure how that happens, but it does. Looks like maybe I got into his matlet right there. And I'm shooting the Rudy in the face, but this M4 right here, he's really causing me issues. Every time I kind of give him side turret, he's able to pop through on that thing as well. The M4 itself is shooting the HE, so he's causing me issues with the HE there. Taking little chunks of me every time. Oh, there is a leopard by me. He's a problem. And I'm thinking, man, I got to get out of here. These guys are tearing me up. Moving in here again. I just got to get rid of one of these guns because I can't afford to let any more of these guns keep hitting me. You can see that I've got kind of a mixture of some bounces, some hit point pool. There's a T-67 tearing me up now. And finally I get a buddy to come in here. I see this T-67. There he is. Get bumped by the Churchill. He takes that guy down. And now it's looking a little bit better. I'm really interested in getting rid of this M4 because he has been nothing but a thorn in my side. We'll do that. There he goes. And the Easy 8. He's got nice side shots, so I'm just giving him side armor here. Now really, I'm down to a 2-shot to these guys if I'm not careful. Someone else coming up here, and we take him down. Got a KV-2, I make him miss, somehow just barely make him miss. That was an example right there of that poor gun depression. If you get past about, I want to say about 80 degrees, 75, 80 degrees of turret turn, you start getting around that 90-degree point, and it becomes very difficult. Try to track this guy and damage him. Good news is he does not go after me. All he had to do was come down here to take me out. Don't know why he prioritized that other guy. I thought I might be able to track him and keep him tracked, but he still had some repair kit there. I'm also pretty excited artillery did not pay much attention to me on this game. I'm quite honest, I do not know why. Probably bombing the snot out of all of our guys that are trying to get on the cap and cap this game out. The M4 ends up killing off the T-71 CMCD, which was a huge deal for us. With him alive and my Easy 8 dead, then I'm pretty much done. Or my Easy 2, I guess it is. It's an E2. So now I'm looking for this KV-2. But you can see, in a brawl that's not a brawl against a bunch of heavy tanks, no idea how I survived that. He does 204. He's probably just screaming right now. In a brawl against a bunch of smaller tanks, and I'm talking about tanks, not necessarily just mediums, but at tier or lower than, usually lower than, it can be quite the bully tank. So it's got a decent hit point pool, hits decently hard. The armor will come through every once in a while, and you'll see that it actually works out to your advantage sometimes. Throw in a little bit of luck. But I thought that was an interesting one for the way that game, or for the way that tank plays. Let's go to the third one. Alright, so for the first two, the first one we did a little city brawling, showed you some of that. The second one, a more open map, a little bit of the swarming brawling kind of thing. Let's take a look at one of this tank's strengths that I talked about early on in the review, and that's its pretty decent accuracy and standoff capability. You see that I've loaded in, once again, top tier, Sand River, and I am coming over this way. This is a assault. Sorry, this is a standard. It's not an assault. A standard. And I'm coming down here into the center, and I figure that based on what they have, there's probably not a whole lot down here that can take me on unless they send in, what is it, the Tiger right there. Now I get very aggressive here because I'm thinking, let's go test out what this thing can do, just getting in their face, and I'm just taking multiple hits. The good news is I'm bouncing quite a bit. T-67, some are going through, they've switched to gold, now they're going through, and I end up giving up a bunch of hit points just to take down a KV-1. So not a really great trade right there. And this transitions me into a much more careful situation. I do get the M6 out, but not a great trade. You know, so what? A tier 5 and a tier 6 traded for a good half of my hit points. So I'm going to back on out of this little hole right here because they've got all those TDs camping back there, which I obviously should have known going into it. And that transitions me to, alright, let's start working more of a sniping standpoint from this tank. I have a good push down in the south down there going towards their cap, and I figure if I can get up on top of this ramp here, I should be able to start taking shots on their cap and any guys then who may be camping back here potentially or up on their cap. The reason I can use this center ramp right here, one of these ramps, is that I have a whole bunch of guys down here keeping them from shooting me in the side because they're spotting all this down here, although I just lost one of them. So I know the Hellcat is back over there somewhere, and so I'm going to spend the rest of the game hanging out here looking for guys like this who unwisely move across. There's that gun depression. I can just hide most of my tank down below this ridge right here. Get a highlight on this guy as he comes up and over and out of the buildings. There he is. And that pretty good accuracy, pretty good shell velocity, and I end up helping take down that Panzer IV. There's a Stug up here, some other guys. Oh, there's a guy I can shoot maybe, T-67. No, that's a miss. Bummer. Let's see if I can get him. No, how about these dudes who are a little bit higher up here? Maybe this T1, there we go. So decent, comfortable zoom, and boom, there he goes. T-67's making a run for it. What I really need to do, though, is avoid getting spotted. So I get spotted here with the 3 artillery, I'm going to get bombarded. And if I do get spotted, I'm going to have to disappear for a while. Otherwise, they're going to be shooting at me pretty immediately. Looking for the 67. That's being a little risky getting closer, so I'm going to back up. Like I said, I don't really want to get spotted right here with the 3 artillery. We are losing a bit up in the northeast. That is concerning me. I'm sort of looking over that way right now, thinking about whether I need to move. So he starts backing up, and there's that accuracy. So even though it wasn't fully zoomed, pretty darn good gun for that. So the LTG is there, and the Hellcat. The LTG is a problem for me. If he gets in around me, starts circling me, shooting me, I could definitely have trouble taking him down. So I'm looking for these two to pop up here, and maybe I can get some hits on them. What I'd really like to see is my artillery or somebody take out that Tiger. And now I'm just basically anchoring the team on this ramp right here. I've got some guys moving again down to the south. The push towards the cap was foolish. They kept going towards the cap, and they all got cleaned up by a bunch of camping TDs and artillery, which is what they should have known would happen. Pretty predictable, I think, for pushing down that south line. But we got a scout this time. Hopefully he's clever enough to not get seen and killed. And the Tiger up there does not seem to be interested in pushing, and he's probably getting bombarded by artillery right and left. Got the 01 hanging out. Alright, there we go. It's got some guys moving around. Here comes the Hellcat. Looks like he wants to try to get around. Ill-advised early shot. Doesn't quite get there. Hellcat's backing up. And I'll just blow right over the 1375 and take him down. Did not want to lose that 1375, so I do push that shot just a little more than I probably should have. With the good penetration, you'll notice I've not dabbed 2, not really required in this game at all. Even in the process of saying, man, I just want to make sure I win. Now, if I came up against the E2, the front of the E2, or even the Tiger, I probably would push the 2, especially at this point in the game, just to make sure they died. There's a Stug. There's that good accuracy that just right in there and takes that guy down. And we're looking around. We've got 6 kills. Not a lot of hit points. There's a guy clearing the open right there. Miss him initially and then get a shot in there. Again, not a lot of hit points, but definitely racking up the kills on the near-deads and the little tanks. Still concerned on what the Tiger's doing. I figured I may have to go back to Cap if I don't end up seeing him. The Hummel's sitting on Cap. He'll be the canary in the coal mine. Unfortunately, the Owen Experimental has decided to push, which I can't quite figure out, but he does. And this is a difficult one. I feel like if I move towards their cap, then I'm exposing myself potentially to their guys coming back. If I go to our cap, I'm worried they're going to show up in places like this right here, and I won't be able to support this AT-8 that's moved on to their cap. So since he's doing the cap pressure thing, and there goes the LTG, so I figure, alright, let's get a shot on this dude. Nope, let's miss him. Get a little height here. Maybe he'll stay out in the open. That bumped me out a little bit. I'm thinking, oh boy, now I got trouble. And then he's moving back. But wait a minute, he's circling the AT-8. That's going to give me shots. So let's get back in here. And we'll move forward. Ideally, the AT-8 can survive that. I wish I had just charged forward to begin with, because I'd already be up over the edge of that and shooting this guy. There's the E2. Tiger's dead. Now I've got an artillery behind me, so I'm thinking, alright, do I need to go get him first or the LTG? I'm thinking, yeah, it's got to be the LTG. Not quite enough to kill him. Though that was a pretty high roll on him. He doesn't really seem to know I'm here until never, actually. I'm not really sure what he was looking at. There's the E2. There's the artillery. I want to get the artillery, but I can't cross without getting hammered by the E2. Oh, never mind. No worries. Almost got that guy. Kind of what I was waiting for right there. And we'll just drive down here. I've got to actually chase this dude because he makes a runner. Heads through this ravine. Arroyo, whatever you want to call it. Miss. Speed this thing up. I got 7 kills. Am I going to get it? Artillery's raining. I shoot and miss. I shoot and bounce. Oh, geez. I have some hit points to give. That's fine. Go ahead and shoot me with your silly HE. Oh, not enough to kill him. Maybe the artillery's going to get him. Who's going to get the kill? I can't ram him. Dang it. Oh, somebody missed. And down he goes. Just barely getting the 8th kill. 2,185 damage with 1,065 blocked and 429 assisted. So a pretty good example of that sort of second tier standoff capability that I think a lot of people would say is really this tank's strength. Again, realize I always call that a tactic, not a tank. It was the thing I used right there as opposed to saying this is what my tank always does. As you remember, I went forward trying to be that more aggressive, heavy bruiser tank down in the pit right there, and then I fell back to being more of a sniping tank. I don't usually go down into the bottom right there. I was more curious what this tank could do, and it was kind of as expected. I sort of got shredded by stuff and had to back out and change my plan right there. All right, so we'll go to the wrap-up for the AMX M445. So for the wrap-up on the AMX M445 review, this is a solid tank overall. It always kind of has been. The gun is where you're going to find this tank makes its money. The armor is somewhat indifferent, but can be used. Gun depression is good, so the chassis that the gun is on is okay as far as mobility and the capability to use the gun. What's interesting about the tank is it gets a lot of bad press. And Wargaming's come in and said, hey, we want our tank lines to all kind of fight the same. So what you're going to find that's the same on this tank is the mid-tier heavies for the French are actually pretty good on the gun. And as a matter of fact, the tier 6 and 5 actually have some pretty hard-hitting guns, even though they're weird little tanks, the BDR and such as that. And they're kind of known for having great guns. When you get to this, the gun's okay. It's not very hard-hitting, but it's got some pretty decent capability as far as pen goes, so that's nice. But when you talk about Wargaming saying, hey, we want the tanks to fight the same, this is kind of a tweener because it's not an autoloader, which is the one way you can go with 0 armor. It's got some armor, but no autoloader. And it's not a heavily armored tank like the other line is, although I would contend that the turrets are quite heavily armored on the new tanks and not really the hull, which we'll talk about. If you look at the AMX 65T review, I discuss that quite a bit. It takes till the tier 9 before you're really talking about I have a heavily armored frontal assault kind of tank. So this one in particular is neither one nor the other. It's more of a jack of all trades, and it's got enough of it going for it that it's actually a pretty decent tier 7. I certainly wouldn't put it up near the top. I don't know if it would really be near the bottom for me either, but somewhere solidly in the middle. It was a comfortable grind to get up to the 65T this time around. All right, guys, I hope you liked that review on the AMX M445. If you did, make sure you subscribe to the channel. As always, I appreciate all of your support, and we will see you.